came out probably around like 2005, 2006. But Mandy Moore it takes place at a Catholic, or just like a Christian. It's more of like a New Age Christian. And when I say New Age, I don't mean like witchy. I mean like the very modern church culture. And Mandy Moore is the very devout, stuck-up character in the movie. Kind of like the Regina George of the Christian high school.
Okay, I think Susan Sarandon's daughter is Eva Amuri.
Yes.
Who I've never heard of. So
she plays the Jewish girl that goes there that is kind of a punk and very the opposite of Mandy Moore in that movie.
I see. Okay.
But I guess speaking of Mandy Moore, that's probably the role I saw her in that I enjoyed her the most, because it's pretty comedic what she does in that.
Okay. Good. Yeah. She seems like someone who could handle a comedy well.
Actually, Rob and I are watching Scrubs from the beginning as of a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And she has an arc on that. She's one of Zach Braff's love interests. And she's does a lot of physical comedy in her part because she plays a kind of overly dramatic, klutzy person. And they just have her do the most ridiculous, I don't know if she's definitely performing the stunts, but it kind of seems like she is. And she's good in that part too.
I've seen all apart from the last season of Scrubs, and I cannot remember her in. I'm not saying she's not. I'm certain she is, but I cannot remember her in that at all.
She's only in like 2 episodes. So.
Okay. So when you say an arc, it's not a long arc.
2 to 3 episode arc.
Okay, fine. I'll have to revise myself on that. Good. Okay, so any final thoughts on 47 Meters Down?
Like I kind of said in the beginning, when I really thought about how much was taking place underwater, it made me rack my brain to try to think of other movies that do it as much as this movie does. And I'm not sure of another example that really spends that much time filming underwater. I don't know if you thought of anything else.
Trying to think. Because, I mean, a lot of stuff is set underwater, but not necessarily filmed underwater. Things like The Abyss, and just running through films that we've covered. Leviathan is set like entirely underwater, but a lot of that's indoors. Same with The Abyss, but then...
That's how Sphere is as well.
Okay.
It's in a... structure that's underwater, and sometimes they are filming underwater, but it's not they're fairly brief parts of the movie. So I was pretty impressed by that. And of the background featurettes I saw on YouTube, they kind of mentioned, Claire and Mandy Moore were talking about how it wasn't the worst thing. I thought it would be the most miserable experience, but they said that it wasn't as bad, I guess, as you would assume, and that it was a very odd filming experience because they spend so much time filming under there with the crew, and only the 2 actors could speak. Nobody in the crew was able to, none of them had a speaker like the actors did.
Yeah.
So they would have to discuss everything out of the water and then do everything underwater without hearing directions. I just thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, they had a similar thing on Deep Blue Sea 3, actually. We talked about, we had the director of Deep Blue Sea 3 on, John Pogue, and they had that issue of communication, just because he was up on the surface and everyone else was down below. Mm-hmm. So it was all just talking, and yeah, it doesn't sound like the easiest way to direct or in fact do anything is to be underwater.
Yeah. And I think Mandy Moore said at one time, the days that it was 4 or 5 hours underwater, you were like, oh, that was a pretty short day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, being underwater for 5 hours seems, I'm sure there were breaks and all, but that just seems like such a long time to have to be in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds very much like the filming on The Abyss. which is notoriously terrible. There's a whole documentary about how bad it was to film The Abyss. Which, yeah, it was like Ed Harris driving home, pulling to the side of the road and just breaking down in tears. Because of just the awful day he's had. Like, Ed Harris doing that. This, like, one of the most professional actors you can think of. Just can't take it anymore. Anyway. So one thing I like to do on these films is compare them to Deep Blue Sea, and in as many ways as I can. So I've got a little list of how 47 Meters Down is like Deep Blue Sea. So first off, the original title for this film was In the Deep, which shares a title, a word with Deep Blue Sea, but that was also the original title for The Shallows, which I find quite odd. Because The Shallows was released first, it came out a year before, so they released The Shallows, and then it did well, and 47 Meters Down was originally supposed to go like straight to video, I think. But because The Shallows had done well, they released it in cinema, so good. It opens up with a blood-like drink being spilled into water in the swimming pool, just like Deep Blue Sea. This is tenuous. There's a late-night two-people conversation on a dock looking out over water. Which is the two sisters at the start. They have the same thing with Carter and Susan at her birthday. When they start chumming the water, they say feeding time, just like Preacher does. There's when Matthew Modine shuts the gate, there is like a zoom in and a focus on the ominous closing of the gate, just like Sam Jackson has when they shut the gate for no reason in Deep Blue Sea. There's no reason for them to like the ominous zoom in, shut the gate, because that's not the problem in Deep Blue Sea, but they have that anyway.
Yeah.
There's a faulty winch mechanism, which drops people immediately, just like Deep Blue Sea. Faulty winch on the helicopter. Jim gets dropped.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's so bad. Oh.
There's a face-first shark attack in close quarters, which is very reminiscent of a scene in Deep Blue Sea 3. I just wrote sharks, because I wanted to have some kind of comparison. There's sharks in both of these films. There's a reason we're talking about it. When the dead Javier appears, his head appears kind of the same way that dead Jim's head appears in Deep Blue Sea 1. There's an unintentional hand cutting. That's supposed to be the intentional hand cutting of Deep Blue Sea. There's a spear gun Deep Blue Sea. There's a slow ascent with a bright light. What was that? I make this list as I watch the film, and then I read it for the first time now. So yes, when they're swimming up, they've got the lights, they've got the flares. It's just kind of like when they're swimming up out of the Aquatica. And when they get up on the surface during the hallucination, when Elise gets bitten in the leg, she gets dragged around just like Preacher does, and then she stabs it in the eye just like Preacher does, and then lets go of her just like it does Preacher. So this isn't the most Deep Blue Sea adjacent film we've had, but there's some things. And then final thing is, how deep and how blue is this film? As we've already said, it tells you. It's great. But Jess, if I were to tell you that on average Deep Blue Sea is about 47.5 feet deep and 31% blue, do you think 47 Meters Down is on average deeper and or bluer than that?
Yes.
Yes,
I would. I would say, I would think both. Yes.
You would be correct. This is on average 97.5 feet deep, so which works out being to about 30 meters. So I look at the time they spend at 47, then they go up to 40, down to 47, then up to 29, down to 47. I work out how much time they spend on these.
Oh my gosh.
I actually did this twice for this one, because there's the hallucination and then there's the real. So if we look at the hallucination, then it's 29.7 meters deep. If you look at real, because she's just stuck down at 47 meters deep the whole time, it's 32.2 meters deep. So it actually works out a bit more. But I went with what was shown on screen. So, and then blueness. This is the bluest film we've ever covered. This is 81% blue. This is running the table on blueness.
Hey, I came to win.
You came to. I mean, depth-wise, you're nowhere near. Because we've had The Abyss, which is 2,850 feet deep. We've had we've had The Descent, which works out as 6,700 feet deep. Aquaman is 10,000 feet deep, and Leviathan, your other choice, 14,700 feet deep. Nothing's getting deeper than Leviathan until we do Journey to the Center of the Earth, which we may never do. And even then, they'd have to spend the whole film at that depth, because Leviathan is entirely at that depth. They go up a little bit. It's like 95% of it is at the bottom of a crevasse. So yes, but you're done. You're as far right as my graph goes in terms of blueness. So congratulations on that. And I think that'll do it for our discussion on 47 meters down. Jess, where can the listeners find you? What have you got to plug?
Nothing, Jay.
I know.
I can't even plug my social media because I really don't do anything. I tweeted once in like the last 3 years when I was really drunk about I tweeted about The Devil's Advocate.
Oh yes, that's how you can tell you're drunk. You're tweeting about The Devil's Advocate. Have you been on any other podcasts? Been on a Lambcast recently or anything?
Yes. You can listen to the most recent episode of the Lambcast I was on was about Cube, which I thought was a very fun episode.
It was indeed. I agree. I listened to that.
Oh, yes. Thank you. We should have done Cube and Sphere as a double feature, but
Triangle as well.
Yes. Oh, yes. I watched that recently. That I'm surprised hasn't been included in a Lambcast at this point because so many movies of its type have been covered on the Lambcast.
I'm not a fan of Triangle. It had been really bigged up to me. It was like, you got to see it. I had it on DVD for years. I finally started to watch it, and I found it so predictable the whole way through. I was disappointed with the whole thing. Anyway, that could be Deep Blue Sea adjacent. It all happens on a boat, but we probably won't cover it.
You can also find the backlog of movie writing and podcasting at FrenchToastSunday.com.
Excellent. Listeners, as for me, as for the podcast, you can find it on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Deep Blue Sea Pod, or email us deepblueseapod@gmail.com. You can read more of my writings over at lifevsfilm.com, LifeVSFilm. Follow me on Twitter at LifeVSFilm. And listen to the Lambcast once a month when I do a Lampardy episode. We had Jess on earlier this year for a French Toast Sunday special. That was a lot of fun. Which is basically a monthly movie trivia episode based on Jeopardy. We're getting into the finals for the 2021 tournament coming up soon.
Yeah, our last chat on here was the answer to Final Jeopardy.
That is the case with so many people. I just scroll down my Skype. It's like, what is? Everyone. It's like this is how I interact with most people. Because since I've stopped doing the Lambcast as the host, I've lost touch with a lot of people. Regularly, so I thought this is how I talk to most people is via podcasting, and I'm fine with that. I like to have conversations to a schedule. So good. Well, Jess, do you fancy coming back next week? Because it looks like there's a sequel to this film, and I think you'd be the best person to talk about it with. So do you want to come back next week and talk about that?
Yeah, I think I have to. I have to see this through.
You do. There are already two. Don't worry. There's not a third one yet. But if it ever appears, we'll have to have you back to talk about it. But yeah, listeners, come back next week. 47 meters down, Uncaged, the sequel. It's there. It happens. When I showed it to my wife, she was like, "It's actually called Uncaged," because I've been saying it in that stupid voice, and she thought it was a joke. And then she asked, "Does she go back down again?" Which no, different people. So come back next week to hear us talk about 47 meters down, Uncaged. But as for today, thank you very much, Jess, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I've been Jake Lewis, and I'll Deep Blue see you next week.